All right, welcome all. Thanks for joining us for our June meeting. Still virtual, but maybe that will be changing soon. So this month we're talking all about building efficient workbooks, right? How can you optimize your workbook's performance, whether that be calculations or data structure, or some of the other bits and pieces you're doing throughout your workbook. For those of you that have been around kind of Tableau for a while, you've known there's a document that was floating out there that was 80 something pages long, right? That went through kind of step by step, tips and tricks of how you should be building out your workbook. So that document was actually updated last week, 2 weeks ago, with Tableau in cooperation with Interworks, which is one of their big partners. And we're going to go through some of our some of our favorite tips, things we've picked out of this document. And then towards the end here, we'll open up for Q&A, any efficiency struggles that you're having, or if there are any particular items in this workbook that you're curious about. So to kick everything off today, first, we're going to share this document in the chat at some point. So don't worry, you'll be able to have access to it. But before we get to that, we're going to go through a couple housekeeping items. So go ahead. Yeah. So for those of you that haven't been with us before, we're the North Texas Tableau user group. We meet monthly, whether that be virtual or when we're back in person in Plano, Texas. We meet at the shops at Legacy area, or Legacy West, that general vicinity. We are a Tableau specific group, of course, but we do kind of tend to, focus on general data topics from time to time. You can follow us on LinkedIn or on Twitter at the account you see there on your screen, Real North Texas Tableau User Group, or NTX_TUG. Quick look at our team there. Just quick introductions. Tim Cady, I'm with JP Morgan Chase. Joey, Brandi, you want to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, Joey Ramos. I do data viz and data transformation consulting.
And hey everyone, I am Brandi Locker, and I just pretty much get to play in Tableau all day long. That's great.
Excellent. So I think we're ready for our next slide.
Yeah, we do have a fourth member, Stephen Shoemaker. He is transitioning to a new job, so he can't join us today, but just wanted to make sure I went ahead and introduced him.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. Definitely. Yeah, Stephen won't be able to be here with us today, but he is part of our leadership team here with the user group. So if you've been to one of our past meetings, this slide might be familiar. We put together a rough kind of outline of what to expect from a content perspective from our group in 2021. Originally when we met back in January or December, we wanted to present content that followed kind of the flow or life cycle of a dashboard. So we led off the year talking about data literacy, and then that led into data engineering, right? Building data sources and how to structure something that's optimized for Tableau. We had the super tug with Atlanta last month, so that kind of put our plans on hiatus, but we're back to, our normally scheduled content. And as you can see, rounding out the rest of the year, we're going to be talking about dashboard design and ultimately delivery and soft skills. Hopefully by the time December rolls around, we'll be in a place where we can all get together and have a drink and maybe have a holiday party. That's something we've done in years past. Joey's done a great job of scheduling that and getting that together when he was kind of running this group solo for a while, but that's something we like to do this year, and we'll keep you guys all updated if and when that happens. So that's our tentative plans, but before I get to the agenda, what I do kind of want to put out there is a quick little survey. So Brandi, if you wouldn't mind sharing that survey in the chat. What we're hoping to find out today is, in addition to what we have on the agenda, is there anything from our user group that you'd like to hear more of? Are there better dates or times for you to attend meetings, right? are you interested in presenting? So a couple different things there we're hoping to find out. Shouldn't take more than 30 seconds. So that link is out there in the chat now. So if you wouldn't mind checking that out, filling that out for us, and giving us some feedback. Kind of helps us tailor fit these sessions to our audience and making sure we're giving you guys the most relevant information. All right. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and, yeah, if we could jump into the agenda. So like I mentioned, we're here today to talk about dashboard efficiency, right? Building the best possible workbook you can, optimizing, calculations, data sources, these sort of things to get the most performance out of your workbook, both on desktop, but also ultimately when you deliver your dashboard to your stakeholders on server. So we have 3 parts here we're going to walk through. There has been a little bit of a shift in our agenda as Stephen couldn't make it. So, we've called an audible. Joey's going to help us out, and we're going to do what we can, from a content perspective today. So what we're going to do, Joey, do you have the other workbook ready to go?
Yeah. Am I going first, or who's going first?
No. So I think what we'll do here is I'll walk through performance recording.
Okay.
And then, whether you or Brandi wants to go next, whichever you're comfortable with.
Gotcha.
So one way we measure efficiency, right, is particularly, one major way is how long a dashboard takes to load. And there are a couple different ways to measure this. The first and most important thing you need to do is establish a baseline, right? You have to figure out, hey, where's my dashboard at? And where are the actual action items or pieces that I have room to improve? We do that with something called performance recording. So that's available on desktop. I don't believe there's any version restrictions on it, if I remember correctly. So everyone should have access to this. So from an efficiency perspective, this is the first thing I would do, right, when I'm coming in to try to improve a workbook. So I'd go to help and then settings and performance. And you can see there is a start performance recording. So what that will do when Joey clicks that, and now it's going to track everything he does on this dashboard, and you've kind of filtering any actions that he takes in terms of clicking on a visual, changing pages. So all these things are being tracked by that performance recorder and ultimately reported on, what's their execution time, how long does it take to load. So we're going to let Joey go ahead and click through some of these things, change some of the settings. And then once we're satisfied, we'll take a look at that recording.
You have to go, to help,
Yep.
go back.
And then you can stop performance recording. And what that's going to do is create a new workbook for you that should open up here in a second. All right. So like I mentioned, what this workbook is going to give you is all the compute times, right, that were generated from any of the actions Joey just took. You can see there it's color coded. So there's executing queries, compiling, geocoding, so on and so forth. One thing to make note of, if you don't already know this, every time you put a view on a dashboard, right? So every single sheet you bring into a dashboard, it's essentially its own standalone query. So every sheet is going to have an execute query time. That's why you see executing queries the most prevalent category there. So what we can do is use this performance recording to identify exactly which sheet. In this case, it looks like it's given us a bunch of temp information. That might be because we downloaded this workbook off Tableau Public. But what it's going to do is prompt you, to look at exactly what sheet is having the compute problems, maybe exactly what filter. So, you can see here right at the query section at the bottom that Joey's highlighted. It's actually written out as SQL language. So if you're familiar with that, this is going to be real easy for you. But you can go to that view and see exactly what's taking so long. Again, whether it be a filter, dashboard action, so on and so forth. So we show all of this to you with the reason being that you always need to know exactly where you need to improve on a dashboard. You can't just go in and start grouping things together and condensing filters because it might not be relevant. When I'm coming in to optimize a dashboard or optimize performance, this is the first place I always start. Create a performance recording, mimic what a real end user would come in here and do. And then once I'm satisfied with that use case, it kicks me out a performance recording, hopefully based on, some sort of real world interaction. And that then becomes kind of your actionable plan to improve the dashboard. Joey or Brandi, I'll turn it over to you for a second. Have either of you, in the past been able to leverage performance recordings in your day-to-day stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. There's also a feature. So if you have access to a Tableau server at your, wherever you work, if the admin is turned on performance recording, you can do the same thing in the server. And if somebody comes back to you and says, hey, this dashboard is taking too long to render or to open, and sometimes it's taking 30 to 40 seconds. What you can do is, if they activate Tableau recording, performance recording on the server, you can go and you can click K record and sort of just start clicking through it. What it'll do the same thing and create your workbook, and you can then see, hey, why is it taking so long, right? Is it a query issue? Is it a rendering issue? But that'll tell you, where to start. So for instance, this is the query that's taking the longest. If you were to do performance recording from the server, you would get something similar, and you could say, hey, I got one query here that's taken 10 seconds to execute, and maybe you can go sort of try to figure out what's going on and then optimize that query. So yeah, I've definitely used it in the past.
What about you, Brandi? Any experience with the performance recorder at all?
Honestly, I have not used this like I should. I have used it a little bit on some of the most egregious dashboards that we have, but I definitely need to make it a regular practice, especially after reading through the white paper. I'm like, oh, I need to.
Yeah.
All about establishing that baseline. It's important.
Yeah, it's almost overwhelming, right? All the things you could consider when sort of optimizing performance, based on that document. So
yeah, and I think just one more note to add to that. It's probably easy to maybe want to overlook that step after you've finally gone through the grueling process of maybe designing a workbook and multiple dashboards for the business, and you're ready to move on to the next thing and keep meeting the next deadline. But one important thing to know is just, I don't know the exact number, but the general audience, like if you were to look up like web design principles, you've only got a few seconds to really get their attention, unless they just really have to have that number for some reason. They're not going to just sit there and wait forever for it to load. And so it's a good way to drive utilization of your work.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's something we haven't even talked about is really you start to lose engagement, right? If your dashboard's taking 20, 30 seconds to load, right? How much attention do you have of theirs at that point? So great point. So now that we've kind of talked through how to establish a baseline, performance for your dashboard, we will now kind of dive into the document that we referenced. And for those interested, I will share the link in the chat. Here, I will either turn it over to Joey or Brandi to kind of go through some of their tips they were able to pull out of that document.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and go first here, Brandi. Yeah, so I'm filling in for Stephen today. So he had a few tips that he wanted to introduce to you guys. One being using the in operator that was introduced in 2020.3. Also, once you do publish a dashboard to the server, some production considerations, things you need to consider before you publish something that are helpful tips. And then the value of using visuals over tables. And so I'll show you a few examples of those. All right, so first let's go ahead and take a look at the end statement. So this is just a screenshot from the document that Tim's going to send you guys. So the end statement was introduced in Tableau in 2020.3. And if you're familiar with SQL, you could write an end statement that says, hey, I want, this dimension to equal, X, Y, Z. And then in your where statement, basically it's going to find anything in your data source that meets that criteria, right? Well, Tableau didn't have this in the past. And so in the past, what they would recommend is that you create a set, right? So in this case, if I had project as my dimension, I would right click on project, and then I would create a set. And then in my set, I would say I want project 1 or project 2, right? So that's one way they did it. Another way is you see people write or statements like this or statement here, and they would say, hey, set it to true if project equals project 1 or project equals project 2. The problem with that is it's extremely inefficient. And the way it's inefficient is you can see right here, it will evaluate each condition individually before resulting the entire statement. So it's breaking up these two into two different conditions. And then scanning the whole set and saying, okay, does this meet the criteria? And then does this one meet the criteria? And if so, then true, right? So it evaluates each condition individually, which is less efficient than if I was to use a set, which is just saying if it's in or out. Also going to be way less efficient than actually writing an end statement, right? So project in, project 1, project 2, and it's going to treat this as one statement rather than two statements. Okay, so let me show you how this works here, right? So originally what we had to do was we create a set, right? So let me go here and I'll show you how these sets are created. So the dimension I'm using is called WP type. And so if I wanted to create in the past, if I wanted to do something similar to an end statement, I would just go to WP type. And as you can see here, I already have one there, but I would right click, I would go to create a set. And then I would say, okay, if it's in my set, if it's true, I want to add in dynamic. Right, it's basically how you did it. And so I already have one here, add in dynamic, and then I could drag it over, right? And then now you could also use sets and calculations. So if I said, hey, if this, then, X, else Y, something similar to that, right? And then I could just, what I can name that anything. Right, and then I have my X's and my Y's. So sets are cool, right? So very similar to an end statement. I don't see why you couldn't use those, especially then if you want to also use a set action. So sets are cool. I've never really used or statements, but essentially what this or statement is going to look like is my WP equals add or WP equals dynamic. And then if I drag that over to color, you can see here that, okay, it's true, right? For these two, it's null. And then it provides another option is false, right? So any of my null values are going to be blue. And then my anything that has a value that's not in this criteria is going to be false, right? So I have three different options here. One thing to note here, I have in or out with the set. Very similar to a set, introduced in 2020.3, I can write an end statement. It's very, very simple. It's very efficient too when it comes to actually setting this up because it doesn't take you too long to do it, right? I just do WP type in, add or dynamic, and then it'll set it to true or false. So another thing to consider is before this, when I say it saves you a lot of time, before this, what I used to do is I would have to write a case statement, right? WP type. If I didn't want to use a set, when add, then X. When dynamic, then X, else Y. Right, that's another way I used to write this. And if you have a lot of if you have multiple values, then if you have more than just two, that can get pretty time consuming. So the end statement, I definitely like it. It saves me a lot of time. It's very efficient. It's more efficient than an or statement. You could also use a set, which is just as efficient. And I would use a set if you want to do something, further down the road when it comes to like a set action. So the end statement's cool. Highly recommend it. Any questions?
Okay.
Yep.
Joey, real quick, what version did you say this came out with?
2020.3.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. The end statement's it's my go-to now. When I have something like this, right? When I want to categorize multiple types into a certain bucket, I use the end statement. All right. So let's go ahead. We're going to talk about viz versus text before we get to production considerations. So this is straight from the white paper, right? So, visuals are better than text, and I can tell you a whole lot of reasons why I prefer visuals over text. And I want to be careful what I say here because I don't want to offend anybody, but I would have to say 80% of the time, this is what I see right here. What I see are individuals creating line item details, right? So what they'll do is each row is the most granular level, transactional level in your data set. They'll have a row for each transaction, and then they'll have about a dozen to maybe 16 filters. The user can filter whatever they want, and then they allow the user to export it. The user then wants to export it into CSV. And then once it's exported in CSV, they'll do additional analysis in Excel, right? So I see it all the time. People use Tableau as a data extract tool. Tableau is not a data extract tool. All right, if you can extract up to 100,000, 500,000 records, but that's not what it's used for. It's a database tool, right? So if you are using it as an extract data tool, I would highly recommend maybe creating an R Shiny app, or maybe using I don't know if you have AlterX. You could use AlterX to create an AlterX app, to say, hey, I want these filters, these parameters. But there are better tools out there to use than Tableau for data extraction. So don't do that. I would say it's not the right way to use Tableau. Also, when working with clients, they're saying here, the user wants one dashboard to rule them all. That's impossible, right? I mean, we all experience it. You create a dashboard for a particular business unit, and you want this one dashboard to do 20 things. I would recommend trying to, as it says here, have a clear defined purpose and then walk the user forward, right? Have one dashboard, and then the second dashboard drills down to the next level, and the third dashboard to the next level, and maybe the fourth dashboard to the most granular level, right? That's basically how I like to build things. So any questions regarding visuals versus text? And I'm going to show you an example here of how it would go about, instead of showing something in a crosstab, to maybe providing more value into a viz.
Joey, there was one question. I think it was related to your previous example. Do you happen to remember the version number for the case statement? I know it was a few years back. It wasn't 2020.3, but I don't happen to remember a version number.
Yeah, I can't remember either. I've been using it for a while now, so
Yeah, I know I at least used it as far back as 2017. So it's been around for a little bit. I just don't happen to remember exactly when it came out. But yeah, its case has been around for a little while.
yeah. All right. Okay, so let's go ahead and move forward with why visuals are better than text. So on the right over here, I see this, 70% of the time. I will see this as just one dashboard with multiple filters. The filters aren't even formatted correctly. They're just sort of out there. And basically what the way they build this is just for the user to go in there and filter down what they need to, and then extract it into CSV, and then they can do additional insights, right? The problem with this is if I have, in this case, it's 10,000 records. If I have 50,000 records here, then, that's gonna, could potentially have some performance issues on the server, right? If I had 100,000 records, it's definitely, you're gonna experience some performance issues. Potentially not gonna load. And then every time you filter something, it's going to take some time to filter things down. So I don't recommend this. I see this often though. So I can probably get the same message, actually a better message, if I were just to build a viz or a couple of vizzes on top of the same data, right? So in this case, it's just a cross tab with my total profit. So, hey, I got my total profit, 286, 397. They've also got it broken out here by region. Okay, how's my profit by region? I got 108,000 West, 91,000 East. Central is down here at 39. They've also got state as a dimension in here. Okay, so I have it broken out by state in this map. We're looking at profit, by the way. So I have profit in here by each state. Orange is bad, the darker blue is good. And then I have a quick cross tab that tells me my profit by customer. So if somebody was to come in here and say, okay, I'm working in, I'm responsible for the West region. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to click off all. Okay, I got to wait. If I'm on the server, then I'll click West. Okay, here's all my West, my profit. But then, I want to look at maybe just California. So then I got to come up here and go California, right? And then I want to download this and do further, analysis for some reason, or build some videos on top of it. If I build my dashboard correctly, my business correctly, I can pretty much do the same thing in a few click steps. I just go here, West, right, and then I do California. That's 2 clicks, and I can see, okay, here's all my good customers. Here's my bad customers. All right, so these are the customers I want to go hunt down. And then maybe I just go to view data, and there are my customers, right? So take the time. I know that people like to go across tabs and then build a tool for people to export or extract the data. Try to get away from that. Try to show your user, hey, I can provide you better value in just, in my opinion, these, 4 visits. All right, any questions? And this is going to be way more efficient once it's on the server than this if I was to have 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 records loading. Any questions?
No questions in the chat, not yet anyway.
Okay, so let's move on to the next tip here. So production considerations, right? So this is a very long document. It's 81 pages, probably about 75 or 74 pages worth of content. But something to consider. One of the most important things to consider is once you get into production, what you need to consider here. So one thing, focus on the user, right? We want to make sure that the dashboard renders in a timely manner. We want to make sure that I don't have too many filters, right? I want to have a clear, precise message, and I want to make it easy for my users to use and to understand exactly what questions, or exactly how to interpret the dashboard, right? What questions we're trying to answer. Next, if you're working with, a large data set, which in a lot of cases now we're working with data sets with over, 10 million records, it's probably better to use an extract than a live connection. I generally like to use extracts in almost any case that it's not near real time, right? If I just have a dashboard that's updated once in the morning, then I'll use an extract, and then, hey, this dashboard, I'll kick it off at 8 a.m. and just tell my users, hey, expect this dashboard to be available by 10 a.m. That typically works if you only need to refresh it once a day. If you do need something that's near real time, try to get that near real time data set, down to under 50,000 records, and you shouldn't have too many issues using live connection. But yeah, definitely extracts solve the majority of your problems if you're working with large data sets. Simple is fast. So going back to, don't use a crosstab that has 10,000 records. Don't have too many filters. Don't have too many, overcomplicated, calculations. Try to keep it simple. Try to limit your dashboard, in my opinion, to 4 to 6 visits at most. And I think you'll probably have something that's simple and fast. Any questions regarding these first 3 tips for production?
There are a couple questions, but I think that they look both to be related to your previous example.
You want to jump back?
Yeah, and I'll kind of run through the questions for you.
Okay.
So in terms of viz versus text, what questions do you recommend, asking a customer or stakeholder to try to figure out, how to get rid of the table? Michael mentioned that he's had some situations where the user wants to compare row by row, whatever their data is, whether that be, maybe an example is trending month over month or something like that, right? So do you have any, go-to questions or things that you do to influence the way?
Let me read this question real quick. Is this the first one here, Michael's?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and Tim does this too. I call it whiteboarding sessions, right? What I like to do is I like to get in, and Tim can help as well with this. What I like to do is get an understanding of who's the report for, right? Who are the stakeholders? Who are the personas? And then get an idea of, for them, what moves the needle, right? Every business unit has 2 or 3 or 4 metrics that they're graded upon, right? How are you incentivized? How do you get your bonuses, right? In this case is, West region individuals in the West region, maybe they get their bonuses based off, profit, profit increase year over year, right? So that's what I would focus on, is just profit year over year, and just have one big banner, and then just compare, to 2021 year to date versus 2020 year to date, and then break it down by profit by state, profit by customer, and just show year over year differences or month over month differences. If you're showing month over month or year over year, you can just build a parameter that someone can toggle here and say, okay, I want to compare month over month, year over year to date versus year to date. But basically, the one question I like to ask people is, how are you measured, right? From a performance perspective, how do you know you're doing good? And then go from there, and then you can just sort of peel it back like an onion, right?
Yeah, and to kind of add to that, what I like to do, especially when I start a new project, is take them away from the data a little bit. The first thing I'll ask somebody is really, what problem are they trying to solve? Forget about the crosstab, forget about the Excel report you had. If we're going to rethink this, right, and give you some sort of visual analytics to help you answer that, whatever your pain points are, I need to know what those problems are that you're trying to overcome. Rarely, I would say almost never, are you going to have someone that says, well, Excel is the only way I'm going to solve this problem, right? They might think that in the moment, but once they really start to think about what their problem is, you'll start to quickly identify that, there's some sort of visual analysis they can do where they can get the answer faster. And like I said, that's going to be 9 times out of 10. So take them away from the data, take them away from their Excel report and say, hey, what pain point are you having or what problem are you trying to solve? And start there, right? Start there and work your way towards the data. Moving towards, hey, what are the splits? What are the filters? These sort of things. But that's usually the first question that I ask.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to look at it too. But I would also make the argument, to me, this scatter plot provides way more value to me than this crosstab, because I can easily see who my worst customers are. And this isn't in California. We can get back there, but I can easily see though that this customer, Grant Thornton, I got a profit sales of 93.51 and a loss profit of 4,100, right? So these are probably the customers I want to go hunt down. I want to go see what's going on with these accounts. To me, that provides a lot more value in this simple scatter plot than this crosstab will.
And there was one more question here, Joey. Let me pull that back up for you.
Got it.
Crosstabs from Brian. Crosstabs allow for easy download of Excel. Is there an alternative way to allow users to download data in tabular format? Do you want to take that one first?
I don't build crosstabs for people to download, so I don't really know if there's an extension or if there's, yeah, I don't have a whole lot of experience doing that. I don't know, do you?
It is an ask I hear consistently.
Mm-hmm.
I go back to the point you made earlier. First and foremost, right? If ultimately an Excel file is what you need to do something, right? Tableau is not answering the question, right? Tableau is not solving your problem. If the next immediate step you want to take is to download the data. So if that is a requirement, sorry, I lost the question. Let me pull it back up.
No, you're good. No.
If that is a requirement, there are ways to download crosstabs from server or the data from server without giving them a crosstab or a text table visual, right? You do have the option to download data from the Tableau server view itself, right? As opposed to building them a crosstab on their dashboard.
Yeah, are you referring to downloading the underlying data into CSV?
Yeah. The one drawback there is it's going to give you everything, right? It's going to kick you out the entire data set as opposed to a subset. If you have filters applied or something like that. I don't know of any extensions that do that. There may be. I just haven't looked into extensions a ton.
I'm gonna jump in here real quick. I do have one where they download it regularly. It's against my will also, but it's a SOX thing, so I can't even argue with it that closely. For anyone that knows, SOX is some heavy legislation thanks to Enron. But yeah, just as Tim mentioned, you do get everything when you download it that way, including, like if you've got any calculations in there that are more helpful for like formatting purposes, they're gonna see kind of like all the gobbledygook behind the scenes as well. So there might be worthwhile discussion if it's like a non-negotiable, because also there's office politics that come into play, right? Like in a perfect world, we would all have great designs that everyone would just love, but sometimes the battle's just out of our hands. If that does happen, you could consider designing a crosstab that's maybe formatted specifically for downloading, but still making the main link to your dashboard. And that way it's the first thing they see and they have to work for the actual underlying data. There is a note about using extensions on page 11 of the Designing Efficient Workbooks PDF. I have not explored this method, but it's mentioned there. So I would recommend checking out page 11 if you absolutely have to pursue that method. But definitely agree with what the guys are saying. We want to pursue visual data visualization as much as possible, but at the same time, sometimes the higher ups want what they want. We can only argue so much.
Yeah, and it's not, I don't say that because I think data viz is the be all end all, right? I realize there are some occasions where you have to have that source data, right? And that's okay. The question then becomes Tableau the right tool, like Joey mentioned earlier. In some
Agree.
cases it's not, and that's okay. Brian did share one more kind of comment that if he shows visuals and not providing the Excel, sometimes it causes friction. One more point I would add, Brian, there's a lot of times where I'll show a visual and then use some sort of sheet swapping technique to hide the crosstab behind it. So by default, when they log into the dashboard, maybe they see a trend analysis, right? They see a line chart or something, and there's a button or switch they can flip that in place of where that line chart used to be, they'll get their crosstab or text table. But I tend to kind of lead them away from that when possible.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And one more point, and then definitely let Joey finish his part. But there's a fun little game called Find the Nines, and when I Google it, it's not the lotto ticket, but it's basically just a grid of numbers, 0 through 9, just in a crosstab format, if you will. And it's, you give them the user X number of seconds to count the number of nines, and then you demonstrate how the same process is done if the nines are emphasized in some way, whether it be color or size or things like that. So I'll see if, I don't know if you guys know of any resources that we can look up. I'm trying to find something, but it was a pretty effective way to kind of make a case for visualizing the information. So we'll see if we can find some about that and link it at some point.
Yeah, I have a workbook I can send over to you that you can share after Joey wraps up here.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, all right. So real quick, let's jump back over to production. So we went over these real quick. Just something to consider. Limit the data, show the essential. I do the majority of as many calculations as possible in either my custom SQL or in the database on the database side. Use extracts, fixed dashboard size. This will save you some time when rendering your dashboard, right? If it's a fixed size rather than a range, it's going to render, and then maybe it'll blow up to the size of the screen. And then they're telling you here, don't forget about Tableau prep. Yeah, prepping your data is extremely important, right? So it goes back to move complexity to the data layer. So anything you can do outside of Tableau, I would highly recommend. All right. Okay, Brandi, I'll pass it over to you if there's no questions.
Sounds good. Steal the screen real quick. All right, can y'all see it?
Yes.
Okay. Hopefully I'm sharing the right one. It is not telling me which one, but so first things first, reducing the number of nested calculations. So a nested calculation is basically where you just have a series of calcs that just build up on themselves. So here I just came up with a silly example using Superstore data set. If the year of order date is equal to 2020, we're going to call it the most recent year. Otherwise, call it a previous year. Then that formula gets used in this next formula where you would say, if this previous calculation equals most recent year, and the category is this and all these other criteria, then we're going to give them another label. And then you see it come down again in this third calculation to say if this second calculation is equal to a certain value and other certain criteria, then we'll label it something else. So on the silly example, of course, it's pretty obvious to spot, what's kind of silly about it, but I see this a lot in work applications. You'll see it a lot through inherited workbooks, or sometimes as a developer, you're just iterating through a process, and maybe if you're kind of figuring out what the logic is behind the scenes, you just kind of build on each other, but then you never go back and optimize it at the end. And so suggestions on kind of working through this, once you're ready to put the workbook into production. You want to optimize calculations and consolidate them as much as possible. So try to limit this nesting. Easy, low-hanging fruit here. This one's completely unnecessary. You could throw year of order date onto a filters card, or you could incorporate it here and just say if the year of order date is 2020 here, and then include that with the other logic. You could also use alternate functions such as the in function that Joey went over earlier. That's a great one. I was really excited when that was introduced. Case statements using a contains logic instead of if. So definitely want to take a look at that first, and then any calculations that can be pushed to the data source. And by that, I mean, the data table that you're connected to. If you're the one that maintains it, or if you have a data engineering department, if they can kind of implement some of the logic, not all of it, but if there's one or two calculations that are just kind of nasty, they can hope, you might work with them to see if maybe they can incorporate an if statement or a case statement in the SQL that feeds that table, or whatever the case may be. And that way it's just materialized for you in the data that you're connecting to. And then this is all on page 20, if you're following along in the document. It also mentions, always materializing calculations in the data extract. I'm going to be honest, I did see some kind of what I interpreted to be conflicting information on page 37, but like Joey said, I never use live connections. Everything's an extract, with the exception of if I'm connecting to a published data source that's already on Tableau server, then it's by default kind of a live connection. But, if you're just connecting to a table and it's not one that has to be shared across a bunch of workbooks on the server, then you want to go ahead and run the extract and embed that into your workbook for optimal performance. So, any questions on that one? All right. Next up, making groups with case functions or case statements. So on the left side, you'll see the group window. So I just took subcategory and started making my own groups out of it. This is a quick and easy way. It's a static method, and it's not going to be as efficient as some other methods. Right out the gate, the top suggestion was using a case statement. Sounds kind of surprising because more often than not, the recommendation is to use like the built-in Tableau functionality to get optimal performance, but this was one of their tested exceptions. And just a quick side note for like everything that we're covering today, none of these are diehard rules. There might be exceptions just based on how your data is structured and other factors in the workbook. So that's why the performance testing is important. But just kind of generally speaking, they found that the case statements had more optimal performance. And so just doing a quick statement there. And then why would that be the case? Well, straight out of the PDF, the built-in grouping on this, the one that's you see, that's like the I'm trying to say the in-house Tableau functionality. It loads the entire domain of the dimension, so all of the values in that dimension are loaded, whereas the case statement of your calculated field only loads the ones that you specifically name. And then, but if you do need that other category, there's also the option to put else other before your end. So in order of performance, they found that the grouping methods case statement was the best. Second up was using Tableau sets. Third was this functionality, the native group function. And 4 is using if else if statements. And I'm just going to let y'all interrupt me if there are questions, but otherwise I'm just going to keep going ahead. So again, coming back to the native features discussion, sets are a great tool, and they've really been expanding on their functionality as well, which is pretty awesome. So on the screen on the left side, you'll see this create set window. This is kind of just creating a static set. This will give you a value of, if you select it and it's in the set, then you would get a value of in, otherwise it'd be out. And that it is however you label it. And if you need to, make a change, you just have to go back in there and manually update yourself. But you can also have dynamic set values, which is really great. So sets, you can specify a condition. So like the example on the right, you can use a formula. So if the total sales of a product name is greater than $10,000, then include it in the set. Or you can specify any of these other criteria. You can set a range, or you can do a top number based on other measures. So that's one way that they're dynamic. You can also use set controls, and which makes them appear similar to how like a filter box or a parameter box would appear on a dashboard. And then also set actions. So those are great ways to utilize sets. Let's see, I think I covered that here. Yep, they can be manually made or dynamically updated. And they perform faster than the native group functionality and if statements, but they have kind of a similar function. And so this has all kind of been a lesson for me as well. My default is absolutely to go to an if statement. I don't know why I use this for everything. So now I'm questioning a lot of my builds and wondering what I need to go replace with sets. And then last up, on page 53, there's a section. This is only the first 3 items in the bottom of that page on 53, but there's a whole bunch of suggestions on getting the most out of filters. The first and foremost is reducing the number of filters you're using. And so we've all been here. We've all seen this. We've all probably had to make this, where you have a dashboard where they just think they need every filter pretty much available in the data on the dashboard. And the issue with that is excessive filters create a more complex query. So just like Tim mentioned earlier, like every view on the dashboard is going to create a query. And so likewise, every time you interact with one of these filters, that's a new query. And also filters that apply to multiple visible worksheets trigger multiple queries. And so I mentioned somewhere in the PDF, I can't remember exactly where, but Tableau loads only the visible worksheets. And so kind of like this one was a hidden worksheet that would not have been loaded until I pull it up. But it will still, if you've got subcategory applied to 4 or 5 or 6 different views on the dashboard, it's going to run multiple queries to find those answers for you. Next up is limiting use of the show only relevant values feature. And so that's just whenever you click on a filter, you get on the drop down, there's the only relevant values option. This isn't to say it's a bad option, but if you've got, especially if you've got a whole bunch of filters at the top of your dashboard and you've got only relevant values for every single one of them, it's causing Tableau to query the data after each filter is applied because it has to regenerate a new list in that secondary filter. And you definitely want to embed this in a hyper extract if you want to go this route. So again, it's not a bad route. And there are some cases where it's actually a really good idea to use this feature. But it's kind of like, picking and choose, it's a balancing act of your features versus your load time. And then use of the apply button. This one was actually pretty much just a statement of please do this in the PDF. And so on the filter, you just go to the drop down, go over to customize, and at the bottom of the customize option is the show apply button. And that, so this is especially great for filters. Like if you've got state, if someone wants to select 5 or 10 states out of the 50 and you don't have that selected, it's going to load every time they click on a single state. And so it's really great if they need to make multiple selections. If you hit the show apply button, then after they've selected all the things they need, then they can apply the filter so that it only loads the one query versus, it's going to run a query each time they click it. So just a quick example of that here. If we've got some sales by state and we want to show the state filter, if we don't, then it's going to have to load every time. But if we do have this in place, customize, show apply, you'll see this apply button at the top. I'm going to fix this, it's bothering me. So you'll see an apply button down here. In that case, you can select all the and hit apply. And that way only runs the one query. So any questions on any of those things? Did we?
I don't see any questions regarding this, Brandi.
All right, sounds good. I'll pass it back to you guys. Thanks.
All right. So take over from here. I got another tip to share. So we talked a little bit about, limiting the number of views we have on our dashboard, right? Because every view creates a query. If we take that down a step further, every mark we have on our screen requires some sort of compute time. So what I'm going to show you is hopefully a cool little trick to limit the number of marks that you have by taking advantage of some custom formatting. So I do share my screen. All right. So a lot of times when you get asked to do kind of bands or KPIs, there's one go-to method to do it. And I'll start with that first. So what we're going to do is maybe do sales, and then let's do discrete month of our order ID. And we're going to take that sales and make that a table calculation where it's a month over month difference. And let's do percent difference actually. Percent difference, right? So it's going to give us positive or negative percentage, depending on what that corresponding value was previous month. And what I see a bunch of times is, let's just keep the most recent month and we'll do a big up down arrow depending on, whether it's over or under 0. So we're going to go ahead and recreate that. And then I'm going to show you maybe a better way to do it. That's at least going to save you some compute time. So first, we're going to take this sales table calculation that we created. I'm going to call this, I'm going to drag it over to my measure pane. I'm going to call this percent diff. And I'm going to create a calculation off of that. Ooh, opened up in the wrong screen. So this is just going to be if that percent diff is greater than 0, then I want this to return as positive. Otherwise, I'm going to return it as negative. And that's it. I'll just call this pos neg. Okay. Oh, what did I do? Did I miss something there? Oh, forgot my 0. Whoops. There we go. All right. So then what you might do is change your mark to a shape and apply that basically negative or positive to your shapes card there. And maybe do something like this, right? And we'll clean this up so it's a little bit easier to read. Maybe make this a little bit bigger. Maybe move our label around. Right. So you end up with something like this in your dashboard. Maybe it's just 1 month, maybe it's several months, but basically it's a year-over-year indicator or month-over-month indicator in our case of performance of any sort of KPI. Now there is a way to kind of replicate this using custom formatting, and I'll show you how to do that now. So what we're going to do is go in our percent difference calculation, go into default properties and number formatting. What we're going to do is go on to custom here. We're actually going to hop back to our worksheet and steal this little up arrow. Okay, that'll work. Paste that in. %, and we're going to go grab that down arrow. We're going to paste that in. All right, so what that creates, and I'll maybe fit width so it's a little bit better, is it creates that same effect, right, that you get with the actual shapes, but without the need for a second mark. So like I mentioned, every sheet creates a query. every mark you have, whether that be color, size, shape, every, basically every pill you have on this marks card requires some sort of compute power to it. So what we've done is created the same effect, and maybe clean up the formatting again. We've created the same effect with half the compute power in this case, one less pill on the marks card. So that's a real quick tip for kind of optimizing what you're doing in your marks card, especially when it comes to showing these up-down KPIs that we all seem to use at some point. So with that seems to wrap up the tip portion of our presentation today. I think what we wanted to do with the rest of our time is open it up to y'all. If anyone in the audience has efficiency struggles that you're dealing with in your workplace, or any general questions about the document, right? The PDF that we shared out, this one here. Now's a great time to ask. We can talk through it, do some Q&A. I believe you should be able to take yourselves off mute, but feel free, if you cannot, to pop them into the chat, and we'll do our best to answer. Joey, Brandi, any kind of final thoughts before we kind of move over to Q&A?
I was seeing, I don't know if you guys talked about this already, but Craig had a good point in the chat, mentioned limiting the dashboard sizes to a certain constraint. And that actually is one of the tips in this PDF as well. It's on page 23, talks about using fixed size dashboards. So I thought that was a pretty cool one to call out. And also I'm going to hijack this time to put another plug for our survey, because I think we announced that pretty early.
Great.
We're still joining. So I'm going to repost the link in the chat. But just while we're kind of having this time talking through questions and going over other tips to share with the community, there we go. There's a link in the chat to take a survey. It's just for us, the panelists here today. It's not going to be, shared out any of your information, anything like that. Actually, it's pretty anonymous, but it's just to help us kind of better plan meetings in the future and get a feel for what you guys are looking for.
Absolutely. Yeah, and Joey, I know you have some feelings about fixed size dashboards, and I know you've seen quite a few automatic dashboards or things like that. One thing I will say about fixed size is it can be tough to establish what that fixed size is on the front end. Generally we all have the same size monitors and the same size laptops. So if you have a good sense of what the population of your user base has, right? If they're all looking at similar devices, and this is real easy for you, right? You can usually set one universal size and not have to worry about it. I know a lot of organizations, their C-suite tends to look at things on iPads or something like that. So in those cases, definitely still use a fixed size, right? But just specify a second device. And it's tough to see. Maybe I can actually pull it up here, right? Specify a second device in your custom size, your custom fixed size, right? You can do device preview and specify, hey, do I want a tablet, phone, etc. So I want to call that out. If you're in an organization that uses multiple devices, this is one way to kind of maintain a fixed size with your dashboard.
Yeah, definitely some great tips there, Tim. Yeah, I definitely, if you click on custom size, a lot of my users like to print things out to PDF. So what I'll do is fixed size, and I'll go to custom, and I'll go to that A4 landscape, and I'll start with that. And generally this is where I start. If I do want to use, I'll design the dashboard to this size, and then if I do want to use range, I can use range. I never use automatic. I would definitely advise against using automatic, because things could get distorted, especially if items are floating, like a legend or something. But A4 landscape is my go-to.
Yeah, floating can definitely open up a ton of problems, particularly if you have any floating elements on your dashboard. automatic is probably not the way to go.
Cool.
So I'll give you give a couple more minutes for any questions, thoughts. If anyone has any curious about this document in general. If not, we can wrap up a little early and call it a day.
So I'll wait for any other questions. I know it's a long document. I haven't even read all of it yet myself. So if you guys want to start anywhere in the document, I mean, you can pick through the table of contents, kind of choose some favorite features maybe, but you definitely want to take a look at kind of like how Tableau queries data and how to optimize the data itself. So one tip is to hide all of the unused fields in your extract. So once you've got everything kind of, it talks about this somewhere, it's kind of, I'm not sure what page it is, but like once you've kind of figured out what fields you need after you're already ready to put it in production, you can hide all the unused fields, refresh the extract, and that way it should kind of help speed that process up a little bit. I think that's a good one that gets overlooked.
Yeah, so that's on looks like page 35. But yeah, that is a great one. I don't see folks take advantage of that often. All right, so it looks like no other questions. So in that case, I want to thank y'all for hanging out with us today and joining the call. Our next event, I believe, is scheduled for July 27th. We're still deciding on time. Right now it's scheduled for 5, but we're looking at moving that to a little earlier time, depending on, some of the results of the survey and some of the feedback we get back. So stay tuned for that. And thank you all and have a great rest of your night.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.